Boom. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Simulation. I'm your host, Alan Sakyan, and today we're sitting down with Lisa Bessequa.
Hello.
Thank you so much for coming.
Nice to see you. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited for this.
Me too. Should be fun.
Let's do this.
Let's do it.
What's your superpower? I love that title.
That's the big question.
Yeah. It's like
Yes.
the essence of every being.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most important things in a world where we're often thinking in terms of what can we do better or what's wrong, and framing things in the negative. It's a really powerful place to say, what's the thing that you have strength, and what's the place that you are the most skilled, and where can you put that, and how can you put that everywhere in your life?
Yeah.
And let it be your driver.
Yeah, it's like kind of like self-actualization.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a huge part of self-actualization. There's so much more to it, as you know, because that's such a big exploration for you.
Yeah, and that's
We share
for
that in
you as well.
common.
Yeah, so you host the Superpower You podcast.
I do. It's a show that I launched December 14th. I'm at episode 18, and they're long-form interviews with amazing people, some of whom I know from this incredible environment that we share here in the Bay Area, and others who I either come across in day-to-day life, and others I seek out because they're very well known. Mostly they're experts in their field, if not well known. Some are also known. And we dig into that skill set that I call a superpower, which is the ability or the inclination that you've had all your life, no matter which incarnation of your life you've been in, that it shows up everywhere you go. And the interesting thing about superpowers is that not everyone knows what their superpower is, because it's that strength that is so natural to us that it's almost like the water we swim in and the air we breathe.
Yes.
So a lot of times people have to ask other people to reflect back their superpower, and when they do, it seems natural and clicks in and makes sense. And often that happens in my show where I'll see this person's superpower and I'll mention it and they'll say, wow, you're right.
Yeah. And in general, we need to get better at asking people really thought-provoking questions and deeper questions about their own journey and spirit and what they care about in the world. And by doing so, we can unlock that voice for their superpower.
You know, it's interesting that you say that, because one of the themes I've seen come up over and over again in interviewing people is that very thing, that if we can stay, regardless of the situation in our lives and with other people, curious, then we can ask those kind of profound questions that do create the tenor of our lives and do give us the strength to be in the kind of connection that we want to be with people. And I did see one of your interviews that I loved that mentioned that truth, that the quality of our lives is the quality of our questions. And I see that coming up over and over again in the conversations I have with people. Because a lot of times I'm asking people, how do we live an effective life? And it's one of those themes that keeps coming up, is that asking powerful questions that allow people to be authentically themselves is the way to create community. It's the way to be in your own presence. It's the way to help other people recognize their strengths and also experience their authentic self in that moment. And it's also just, I think, like you mentioned in that piece that I'm talking about, it's a great networking skill. Mm-hmm. Because when you've become curious about someone and asked a powerful question that's about the authentic self, and especially the authentic self in its best light, you endear yourself to people because you've actually contributed something to them. And if you can contribute something to another person, then they're going to be thrilled to be around you. So that's definitely one of the things I wanted to ask you, and I don't know, I know we're going to talk about all different things, but...
Yeah, go ahead, come my way a bit.
Yeah. You've done so many interviews, and you've done a lot of thinking about questions. To you, what is one of the things that you see as being a quality of a powerful question? I already mentioned that, and I kind of am riding on something that you said in that video, which is that if you can ask a question that allows a person to share something that's personal to them, then that's a good question. But is there anything else that comes to mind as a question that serves in an interview process, in an interview situation, or just in life?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
It is. It's really good. Okay. So
think?
what classifies a quality question?
Let's say that. What classifies a quality question? What has served you well in interviewing people?
So a quality question, we talked about it a little bit where we said that it is important for the question to inspire something powerful from within the other person. It's also important for me to ask questions that are non-binary.
Yes.
Yeah.
Boom.
So we think very much so like a transistor, on or off, as though we're processing all of this data and information through our perception.
Yeah.
And then we go immigration on or off, healthcare on or off. And so that's creating a major polarization. And if we just enjoy the nuance to all of these complex multivariate conversations, then and stay equanimous, stay even keel. We're not going hyper, super excitable all the time about every single one of these points, or like super duper negative and emotional about these points as well. But we're just, relaxed, and we're able to just peacefully chat about it.
Yeah.
Then I think we can really understand the complexity of that middle ground, and then maybe find things like, what are the top 5 most important aspects of immigration that we should figure out how to discuss, rather than good or bad and on or off. So that, and then I love the ability to say I don't know, and we actually get a lot of people on the show just saying, I don't know. And then we usually follow up by just saying, what do you think then?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah.
Because it's totally okay to say I don't know. It's very empowering to say I don't know. Those are some of the things. I would say another thing is very abstract, societal driving questions. For example, it's abstract to think about wealth inequality, a little bit abstract. Besides, you walk down Market Street, you see 50% of people are on the street and 50% of people are techies, more elite people. And so you see like, whoa, huge wealth dichotomy, huge. At the same time, it's a little more abstract to think of people that have billions of dollars and people that live on less than $1 a day. Very abstract, but let's think about that. That exists in the world. Then the next question is information technology and biotechnology, neuroprosthetics, AI and robotics, space colonization. All these things are sort of cryptocurrencies are slowly launching, and the rich have immediate access to it faster than the poor do. So now the next this is one of the things that I ask about on the show a lot, is what do we do about that gap, that wealth gap? Because again, I ask about this question because it's a pressing question that faces society. Right now, I think in top questions, artificial general intelligence being an existential threat to humanity, and then the second one is wealth inequality, causing a class-based speciation, being these top 2 societal driving questions that I ask about.
So I want to go back a little bit to reflect back what I think you're saying that I think is really interesting, because I love the way you think. You're going off on all different kind of, tentacles to the idea, which is super exciting, and I think also reflects what you're saying, which is that a good question is a big question. A good question is a question that allows for multiple layers of answer and for multiple nuanced ways of thinking, and might just be big enough that the correct answer is I don't know. That's right, because then we're in a generative conversation, right? And so that's super cool, and I love it. And then you started to go off on something else that I think is really interesting, and you just implied it was implicit, but it sounds to me like one of your ways of thinking about questions includes the opportunity to not just, you're not seeing it as a superpower, but as super improvement, as again, generative of a new way of seeing things, of an improvement to our quality of life or to our quality of thought. So what I hear in your questioning are a couple of those things: nuance, really big, like large scale, and generating a positive outcome. And I think that reflects back what you said about the quality of your life, the quality of your relationships, the quality of your conversations is reflected.
Yeah, I can say another aspect to this is to, of course, hang around people that also really love these types of questions and conversations and execution. So actually bringing ideas into the world and actually providing a service or a product or some sort of value to people. We get a little bit tired of just the philosophy over and over again, but when you talk to somebody that actually has a channel or has a product or has something that they're bringing of value, that's further indicative of their ability to actually go and create into the world as well.
Yeah, I was thinking about one of the questions on your list having to do with how the world can be. I can't remember the exact way it was articulated, but it was something like, what is there that we can do, or what changes, what's the pathway to changing equity in our culture and to changing access in our culture. And one of the things that I think I've seen over the course of my living in Silicon Valley since 2000, right, the last 18 years, that I think it's pretty obvious to many people, but the way I'd name it is a disintermediation, right? The fact that we have this liberation in terms of our access to syndicating our thoughts. And whether that's through these kind of channels that we're on right now, or podcasts, or a variety of other means that we can self-publish our own books, that people can write blogs. And I think that access to information and that ability to take our thoughts forward into a product and to reach many people is a huge contribution to changing society and to to creating more equity.
Yeah, I can't believe you're already 18 episodes deep. You just started like 3 months ago?
Well, I'm committed to one episode a week.
One a week, yeah.
And partly because it's, starting anything new is challenging. And it's my belief that I have to just practice keeping on showing up. And the beautiful thing about podcasting for me is the opportunity to learn. And I love learning. I love learning new things. And I love being challenged. And it's just the perfect synergy for me. And, one story I'd tell a little bit, because it relates to this idea that you just spoke about what does it mean to bring ourselves out into the world, to actually not just have thoughts. And I've been giving a lot of thought to that because, and I'm going a little bit of a circuitous route here, but one of the things that I see in particular cultures, say I'm 53, and I think a lot about women my age and the situation that, I homeschooled my kids, which we could go into more detail about.
We definitely are going to go into that, okay. Yes, 100%.
So, and particularly, I don't call it homeschooling, but it meant being very involved in my kids' lives. And in fact, I also co-founded a community of people in the Bay Area who are taking their kids out of brick and mortar school for academic and intellectual reasons, so that they could actually get their intellectual needs met and a customized educational journey.
Correct.
And so in doing that,
that community's like 400 people now?
It's about 400, it's over 400. We keep trying to trim it down to people who aren't active and people who aren't really in need of it, so that it's a very vibrant and engaged group, but we keep on growing because there's just a lot of people who need and want access to a community support environment where they can take on a customized learning journey for their kids and be supported in it. And there's no better place to do that than the Bay Area. Anyway, so the result, what that community tends to attract, it tends to self-select for families who are outside the box thinking, highly educated, extremely intelligent, very involved in their kids' lives, and willing to go an alternate path. And so as a result, we have this incredible breadth of parents, mostly mothers, but we have quite a few fathers too, who have spent, now that the long tail age of the kids is going into college and they're starting to age out, we're starting to accumulate a number of people and parents who spent the last 15 or 20 years, or something around that, 12, 10 years, really engaged in supporting their kids' education.
Yeah.
And now they're saying, what do I do? And these are such vibrant and intelligent people, and they've, for the most part, spent their time learning alongside their kids.
Yeah.
And one of the missions that I have in the next 5 years is to support people and bring some of these amazing people together to find what is that story that's yours to tell, and how do you bring it forth into the world? Because there's a lot of knowledge, there's a lot of jewel, there's a lot of beauty and truth and power sitting in that collective of people whose stories need to be heard.
Yes.
And one of my missions is, how do we help each other? How do we band together? How do we have these kind of conversations that are rich and deep and draw out in each other the truth and the truth of our lives that needs to be told? And then the big question that you just mentioned is, how do we then take it out to the world? How do we serve it up? How do we support each other in having it told?
Yeah, there's all these untapped jewels that are inside of people. It's so fascinating to think about it
On a
that way.
meta level, on a micro level, and that's the beautiful thing, right? You could take one person and say, what's the gold that needs to be uncovered in this person? Or you can look at it in a community and say, this community has so much richness in it that needs to be peeled back and presented and, shared.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's cool, both on the individual level and at a community level, maybe at a family level, maybe at a corporate level, maybe at an organizational level, a national level, a collective level. There's all these tiers of that.
Even though this is our first conversation, my sense is that that is a premise and a value that we share and a recognition that we share. I feel like
Definitely.
I see that in you, in that
Definitely.
almost everything on every layer can be applied at another layer.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
truth is multi-layered and it's like there's all kinds of places where if a truth exists one place, it probably exists somewhere else if you're getting to the generalizable principle.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good way to put it, yeah.
So, yeah.
I'm totally vibing. I love it. Good,
Totally.
good. Okay, so maybe we unpack a little bit more about this uncollege movement. This, because this is very, very fascinating. I don't think enough people are even aware that. I'll do a little chime on something that we talk about on the show a bit, and then you can follow through on it.
Yeah, I'll keep drinking my coffee. While
You keep drinking the coffee. So we speak a lot about the importance of the parent to the child as the child's being birthed into the world.
Yeah.
We even reference the parent as the deity of the child, as in you are the one that is responsible fully for the education of the child. There is, of course, community help. There's supposed to be teachers and mentors and other people, but the parent is this sort of main foundational pillar of trying to open up the child to new ways of thinking, to experiencing the world, to having joy in the world, to feeling all these different emotions. So we think about it from the perspective of how could we possibly be totally okay with the current state of the education system? It's good. It's done a good job, but there are things that it's like missing this little piece to every child that's being printed into the world. It's like a little chip on the shoulder, and is that little chip that's missing, is that maybe understanding the cosmos, understanding evolution, understanding their heart, their brain, understanding their spirituality, maybe understanding morality. Why are we not maybe universally, collectively teaching a couple principles like that? So now this whole like uncollege, this whole alternative educational movement's coming into play, where we have these parents in these schools that say that actually we think that it's good to potentially take kids out of the current school system and maybe try other things, ways that might mold their minds better into the world. I think that's a really interesting way to move forward. Ron, yeah, you have some thoughts on it?
I'm still on the parent being a deity thing, where you just assume that all parents are doing a good job in regards to that. I'm just playing devil's advocate, speaking on behalf of young people that may want to learn and may want to be critical thinkers and may not want to conform to a society that's sick, where a parent would instill that discipline on them to do just that.
I'm not really, what's the parent as deity thing? I'm not really quite understanding what you mean by that.
As a god, the parent is the god.
No, I understand the idea of God, but what do you mean parent as God? Meaning the parent is the all-powerful person in their life and in their education, and is that ideal or not ideal? Is that the query? Like parent as God in terms of emotional attachment, or I'm not really sure. Can you say a bit more?
So the idea of that is that, I mean, imagine birthing a child into the world and then just being like, totally okay for me not to educate this child as a majority of the child's education into the world. I feel like that is not an okay thing to do. You birth the child into the world.
Tarzan worked out fine.
Oh, are you like an unschooler-oriented person?
Unschooler?
Yeah.
Like, explain that?
So let me try to jump in a little bit here and some of these pieces, because there's a lot to talk about in what you said. Like you just like open a little Pandora's box for me.
We do that for each other.
Yeah. So the idea of unschooling is one premise towards learning outside of a traditional brick and mortar school, and it's a particular approach to homeschooling, and I'd love to talk about why I don't use the word homeschooling, because for me it's not relevant. But one of the approaches to learning outside of brick and mortar school is called unschooling, and that's when you trust that the kids are natural learners, and if left to their own devices and left to their own curiosity, with their curiosity intact and with interesting information strewn about them in their lives and exposing them to things, they will do a better job of self-educating and learning themselves than they could possibly get in school. So that also exists on a continuum. There's radical unschooling where people, you know, I'm interpreting it, but where it's really allowed. You can do whatever you want. You want to play video games all day. I trust that you're going to find a way to either learn from that and maybe grow past it, and you're all on your own and it's all good. But there's a continuum. So that's one aspect. So I'm wondering if what you mean by the parent as deity, I'm wondering how that fits in. Because then, yeah, when you were talking about...
think about the first year that a child exists in the world.
Yeah.
The child's helpless.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you nurture that child after the first year, and then in the second year are you going back to work 9 to 5 for 5 days a week and not being there with your child while they learn to walk, they learn language, they learn all these different mobile skills, all these things? Well, why not be there with your child? Maybe progress culture in a way that brings the parent more into the child's life, and then...
Okay, you're getting to a really hot button for me right now. Big time pet peeve, hot button. Yes, exactly. Like, we live in a culture that does not honor the fact that parents are critical. Parenting is one of the most important
There you go.
things.
Now you're exactly at my point.
That's what you mean by deity?
That is the deity
point.
Okay.
So
I just try and make it...
The deity piece is like, I don't know.
Let's think of a better word right now.
Yeah, I mean...
What's the word?
So I had a guest on my show last week. It hasn't aired yet. And her name is Sil Reynolds. And she and her daughter, Eliza, do coursework called... they have a book called Mothering and Daughtering, where daughtering is an active verb, that the role of daughtering is important. Cool. So we were talking on my show about the fact that this term, and I actually did a talk not too long ago on the fact of what's the idea of helicopter parenting, right? So helicopter parenting is this term that is basically laid on parents who are involved in their kids as a criticism of involvement, because we live in a culture that essentially says, that essentially promotes that there should be this rugged individualism, and kids, we should get them to it as quickly as possible, right? Like, get them in their own room, get them handling. It's a very deeply steeped in our culture idea in recent generations that people should be rugged individuals from the time they're like 5, you know? And I just don't believe that. So anyway, when I talked with Sil, I raised this point about the fact that helicopter parenting is a term that I feel is a little bit misused to kind of like abuse parents who are involved and sort of to dismiss the importance of it, because we live in a culture that dismisses the importance and the impact and the profound need of effective parenting for the most part.
Let's unpack that just a little bit more and say that there are crazy helicopter parents that write the college entrance essays and stuff like that.
So her point was this, and I totally agree with her. They're very rare. They're very rare. I mean, I think that is I think that is an idea that is promoted by people who, I don't even know why they would promote it, because involved parenting scares people, maybe, because it's a lot of responsibility, because There's a lot that you give up when you're an involved parent, for sure.
Maybe there's a better way than explaining it via helicopter. Maybe there's a, what is the
So
word?
she took this metaphor, I thought, and she said, you know what? I don't think helicopter parents are very common. She said, the way I like to think about it is as a helicopter pad, because parents can be helicopter pads, and that's the place where we're supporting, because parenting is about scaffolding to me. It's about working on our own selves to be the best people we can be, and supporting and nurturing our kids along the way to increasingly help them to become individualized and autonomous and effective and safe. And listen, I by no means got it all worked out. You know, parenting, if nothing else, is a vast experiment that goes on, and you never really quite know how it's going to work out.
But scaffolding and principles are pretty good things to have. So what are these principles is what we were also referencing in our conversation, and that is kind of what, whether you want to call it a helicopter pad or whether you want to call it being the sole one that's first and foremost responsible for the education of the child, what are these sort of scaffolding, what are these basic principles that parents should be teaching kids? Again, the big should. Oh gosh, putting thoughts in my head that I have to teach my kids. No, there are definitely some things. There are some things. You don't want your kid to not understand evolution. That's probably not beneficial to society. You probably don't want your kid to think that the earth is flat, or that the things like that.
Okay, so you're talking about content right now, and my inclination is always towards meta learning. And I know, you know, we talked a little bit about that now, and my idea of meta learning was evolved, or I started to think about it more when I was actually at a homeschooling conference. And there's this thing at this California homeschool conference where they put a panel of kids who've been homeschooled, and then parents peel them with questions, because all the parents' anxieties and fears about, am I screwing up my kid by homeschooling, come out, and they ask, you know, did you get into college? What was your experience of college? And then one year I was there, someone asked, what's the best thing you got from homeschooling? And this girl on the panel, who's about 18 or 19, said, the best thing I got from homeschooling was the ability to know, and the knowledge that no matter what it is I want to learn, I know how to go about learning it. And to me, that's meta learning, right? So to me, it doesn't really matter whether I apply my kid with the idea about evolution, but in an ideal world, I'm raising someone who's excited about learning, who knows how to ask questions, who knows how to find answers, who is self-aware, who is able to communicate effectively in a variety of means, you know, those kind of things, right?
So if you
content
give these
doesn't matter.
the principles, the scaffolding then is
Critical
meta
thinking.
learning. Is meta learning these principles: critical thought, communication, learning, knowing how to learn whatever you want to learn.
Self-awareness.
But doesn't it help to not believe that the Earth is flat?
Hold on a sec. Okay, what doesn't it help to not
believe that the Earth is flat?
But why would someone believe the Earth is flat?
Because they are ignorant.
But I mean, if you raise a kid, you've just given birth to a kid, right? You're feeding it food. It's hanging around with you.
All over the internet that talks about the flat Earth movement.
Your kid and my kid is much more in danger of having propaganda, my propaganda, than the Earth is flat propaganda, because my kid is, and I'm not therefore, like, I'm just kind of looking at the opposing side. You think you're going to have a kid and you're going to feed it and put it to bed at night and read it stories and then get it up the next morning and take it to your recording studio, and then the kid's suddenly going to believe the Earth is flat?
Well, think about
even if you didn't mention it was round?
Think about just
hey, you got a globe right there.
Yeah.
The kid walks in the studio and goes, oh, there's a globe over there. I don't think your kid's going to think the Earth is flat. Now, the kid is more at risk of...
We're not talking about my kid. We're talking about kids in general.
Okay.
So we're talking about if a kid in general across the planet is growing up in an ignorant state, it's both their parent that then it needs to take on some responsibility for not helping that child learn about the Earth being round, but also the meta learning aspect to it is helping the child be a critical thinker, so that when they see a piece of content on the internet that says that the Earth is flat, or that another piece of content that says gravity doesn't exist, or that even worse so is that maybe something like all X is bad or all Y is good. So this vast generalization of promotion of some sort of value, maybe all peace is good, or all that kind of stuff. But I'm getting at this point of what is the scaffolding for raising children into the world across the planet?
Yeah.
That's the question. What are
Well,
these best principles?
Okay, so I'm gonna just take it back a little bit to, I think what you're hitting on, like, I was gonna be flip, right? I'd say you're really asking, how do I make sure that kids are raised with an education that's consistent with what I believe, right?
I would argue and say not what I believe, but rather than what all 7.5 billion people collectively want to progress to. We don't have global conversations
Right.
about that. Yeah, this is not about me.
Okay.
It's about us.
Okay, yeah. So is it too much of a simplification to say that you might be talking about those meta-learning skills that have to do with critical thinking?
Yeah, just all the meta learning skills, critical thinking, communication, all these skills that you listed earlier, that being a scaffolding for a child to be raised into the world. What are the
How do
best?
we do it?
What are the best practices for parents
Yeah.
to help do it? And if parents don't have the time or that kind of stuff, who are the best teachers or who are the best mentors around or communities around that can help do that for the child?
Yeah, it's a really interesting and big question.
I'm glad we finally got there.
Yeah, and there's a part of me that thinks that the cream just rises to the top, and let me just say that out loud for a second. I might disagree with myself in a second, but there's a part of me that believes this disintermediation piece, the fact that we have access to so much information. I'd like to believe that that gives us exposure in ways that forces us to grapple with thinking, and that our natural inclination is to be curious and to seek truth. And I mean, like, I'd use that really lightly because I'm kind of a big subjectivist. Like, I'm not sure there's a truth, but and so there's a part of me that really would like to see that, and I see illustrations of that not being the case in our world right now. So that's where I take pause. I say, wow, I'm not really sure what the answer is, because you do see so much divisiveness and so much polarization. And the thing that occurs to me is that before we even get to getting to the same truth and making sure that people are, not living under a veil of ignorance because they're believing the world is flat or whatever else, there's a part of me that feels what you said earlier, when we were talking about how you ask questions and how you answer them, that's actually the critical piece. And that is, how do we depolarize ourselves, right? In and of ourselves. How do we depolarize our own ideas? How do we look beyond one belief that we have and then see the nuance underneath it? Or even look at it from a dialectical point of view, right? How do we take seemingly opposing ideas, whether they're mine and yours or mine within myself, and grapple with them to see all those layers of nuance and to interact with our thoughts on that way? And then how do we help other people to do the same thing?
Yep.
So how do we create an environment? That's the real question to me. Isn't so much how do we make sure that people aren't living ignorant thoughts, living out ignorant thoughts, or being taught ignorant thoughts, but how do we nurture ourselves and in each other and our own children? Because it's my belief that that's where we have to start. I really do believe that we have to start with ourselves. Like, it's getting to the point where it's a cliche, but there's a deep truth in it, right? And so for me, the query is, how do I explore my own thinking so that I don't live in a polarization of my own thoughts? So you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, and I don't know what the answer is, because I think we have a long way to go as human beings, and I think that one of the challenges for us as human beings is that our human nature is we want to put ourselves on a side of an idea, of a team, of a species, and we want to, that's where we're comfortable. That's our natural inclination. And at the same time, we want to merge. There's these opposing human inclinations that we are consistently grappling with. And to me, the question is, how do we keep on doing this dance in a way that's productive? And maybe just doing the dance is the generative piece, Maybe being in the conversation is the answer. Maybe exploring the nuances is a step in the right direction. I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you think?
It is. It is. The notion of knowing how to have an outstanding conversation, a conversation that is equanimous, nuanced, thought-provoking, not as little bias as possible, all that good stuff. I would agree that tuning into one's own being and being able to uncover that and bring that to the world is one of the crucial pillars of what we're getting at. And I would continue to argue that the scaffolding that children are raised on is also a crucial pillar of the conversation as well. So those two
So
things.
how would you do it? What would you do, knowing that we're in agreement about scaffolding as an important process?
In the art of outstanding conversations as well.
Right, okay. So from a pragmatic point of view, given that we're in agreement that scaffolding is the role parents play and hopefully the role teachers, whatever teachers are involved, play, right? It's not about delivering the content or shoving content down, like that's last century, right? So given that we're in agreement with that, how would you implement, what would you change in the world so that there was more implementation of scaffolding or meta learning or the kind of skill sets that you think would make this, for this kind of difference? What changes would you make? Like,
I do like the premise of the unschooling. I do like that. I've seen some efforts in Scandinavia where they take children into forests and they let the kids play outdoors in the forests, and they get to go and explore the mud and the twigs and the insects and the branches, and the oxygen out there is fresh and
Yeah.
all that good stuff, and they get to do actual physical exercise, practice motor skills. Love stuff like that. It's completely different from even just recess on concrete. It's
Yeah.
like just completely different. And then, Ron, what was the other thing we were talking about yesterday? We were talking about the who was
Yesterday?
who else? Yeah, that day, that other spin.
In regards to what?
In regards to child education, we had another one. There was another point about
With Robert?
I think Robert.
Robert Griffiths?
What else was he mentioning about child education around the world? There was another good one.
All I remember is his flower reference.
the what?
His flower
May-
reference.
may-
The most
may-
beautiful thing in the
Maybe
world.
there was a. Maybe there was a. Maybe it did have to do with that, but. Okay, so other aspects of the scaffolding that could be put into place. Some sort of base morality. Thou shalt not kill.
Wow, okay. Morality. Morality is such an interesting one to me.
Then thou shalt not kill. Thy earth is round. Are these really such argumentative points that we can't just all be like?
No. I don't think they are. But I mean, I think I'm thinking of it more from the larger piece, not so much from the detail. Like, okay, we're just keeping going back to the Earth is round, the Earth is flat, because it's just a simplification, or it's an example, right? That we can. But the real question is, to me, is.
I'm fascinated by this now. Flat Earthers Twitter.
What does that mean?
You'll see right here. The flat Earth. We'll pull it up and I'll show it to you.
Okay.
All right. Ron, are you on the middle cam? Can you pull this in on the middle cam, please?
The middle cam. I guess right here.
On which one? The PTZ?
Yeah.
Okay. Zoom in on that, please.
Flat Earth Society.
Tell them how many followers they have.
Encouraging the spread of ideas and free thought since 1865. Read the facts. Visit us at the org. 147, almost 48,000 followers. These are people who believe that the Earth is a globe because they saw a car in space on the internet. Oh my gosh. We believe any privately held Okay.
If I may, when you ask the question later, are we in a simulation? Not
This
to,
is
not
real.
to speak on not to
Okay,
speak
just
in
making
defense
sure.
of these flat earthers,
Yeah.
but if such is the case that this is a simulation, then it's possible that that it isn't round and it's multidimensional. I'm not speaking in their defense, but this whole 3D reality, your more subjective thinker you had mentioned
Yeah.
earlier, so I'm a little more objective myself. I'm just saying.
It's totally cool to have, again, I'm just trying to what are the objective scaffoldings for kids growing up? Thou shalt not kill, thy earth is round, thy has a heart that beats 100,000 times a day to power your body. I mean, these are objective thoughts.
Okay, so
There's no such thing as, I'm teaching my child their heart only beats 1,000 times a day. No, that's not how it works. You know, that's not how it works.
So what would you do to change it? I mean, are you a proponent of, do you think if it was possible to go into one of those houses and say, we're taking these kids?
No.
Not like that
No,
level.
not like that. Yeah, it can't be some fucking militaristic shit. That'd be fucked up beyond belief. Some fucking militaristic breaking down the door. You ignorant bitches, give me your children. That'd be so fucked up. Never.
So it's more like, okay, how do we actually promote objective truth or
So here's an interesting example. Why is there no sort of, let's call it a book?
Yeah.
A book for the 0-year-old, a book for the 1-year-old, a book for the 2-year-old. We're not specifically saying that every single child has to be folded into this mold and that they all have to blah, 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 all this. That's not the essence of the point. The essence of the point is to say that if the heart beats 100,000 times a day, just fucking teach the kid that it beats 100,000 times a day, okay? And then if the earth is round, just teach them that the earth is round. And then there's no arguing that. There's no arguing gravity. There's no arguing the molecular structure of water. There's no arguing that your brain is the thing that enables you to process reality. There's just no arguing these things. Now, is there arguing immigration and healthcare and economic systems and political systems? Yes, there totally is. And that's great. But there are certain things that children should be taught into the world. And if we want to say, I'm a nihilist and there's no meaning or purpose to life, I'm not going to push my thoughts onto other people, they can raise their way however they want, that's a valid perspective. Go with that perspective in life. I think that if you want to eradicate suffering as much as you want to eradicate ignorance, that those two things go hand in hand, then we really need to have this sort of, I really have been enjoying this term like wisdom 2.0 or whatever. These people are now starting to say the superpower use, the wisdom 2.0s, these free thought projects, all these kind of things. What do they coalesce into as the scaffolding, and why can't we get along together? Why can't China provide, Africa can provide, South America, Europe? Why can't they provide other aspects to this scaffolding that the United States and Western philosophy doesn't? For example, Western philosophy gives a fuck about meditation. Not pretty much just recently is meditation becoming even an entry level. Meditation 101 is now starting to permeate through Thank You Headspace and Calm and these types of services, because people can't even meditate without a fucking smartphone. Like that is so fucking fucked. In the first place, but look out east. Look onto the eastern hemisphere on the planet. Asia would look at the West and say that the reason why you have conspicuous consumption, the reason why you have greed and power hierarchies that are corrupt as fuck, the reason why you have a political system that's absolutely in gridlock and wanting to polarize the shit out of every single issue is because people, and Swami Ananda was on our show explaining this super well, is people don't know how to practice inner management. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And if you learn how to practice inner management, not only do you become actualized, but then the society becomes actualized. And then we don't have these problems that we have in the West in many ways. So something that's been practiced for thousands of years, the ignorance of a 25-year-old running around on the streets saying that I don't need to practice meditation. I can find my own way to enlightenment. Listen, thousands of years of practice of figuring out the human experience, and you think you can just, your little speck of sand can just go and figure it out yourself? No, you should practice what has the genius that has been taught, the wisdom that has been taught down the years. This is why you go to Tony Robbins for self-actualization. This is why you go to Neil deGrasse Tyson for astrophysics knowledge. This is why you go to people like my gosh, there's so many global leaders across all these different industries, but these are people that have practiced the wisdom of their industry and the dissemination of their wisdom, and even the ones thousands of years. You don't look at a cup. You don't look at a cup and go, oh, this cup. I don't need to use cups. Fuck cups. You don't say that shit. You know why? Because cups are a brilliant invention thousands of years ago.
Okay, so I love that you are bringing back to this idea of self-awareness, right? Because that's sort of consistent with what I'm saying before, which is we don't need to start with how do we change other people's ideas. We need to practice our own inner self-awareness. I mean, you said it in such a beautiful way, very articulate and, perfect. And earlier you said that one of the answers is to go to nature. Right? And that seems like an age-old and true experience that helps us connect with our inner nature and with our experience in the world, and is this sort of experience of ourselves as physical beings. And to me, I have two questions when you were talking. One of them was, where does our responsibility to change these things that we see, these problems that we see? So where does our responsibility to change other people, to change all these ignorant fucks, right? Where's our responsibility to that end?
Including my own ignorance.
Right.
It's my responsibility to fix my own ignorance.
So that's what I was really trying to say, right? Is that how do I keep myself from falling into my own biases and to living out my belief systems as they are polarized, and to adding more, of the binary into the world?
There's a line at Popeyes or at Chick-fil-A, and you walk through the line and you say, do you know that 1 million chickens are slaughtered per hour in the United States? Probably not. They probably don't know, and they probably don't really care.
Right.
And they don't care if the chickens are pumped with human growth hormone, if they're fed shit, if they're caged. They don't really care about those things. Yeah. Because humans care about the survival of their flesh vehicle, so they just need to put something in their mouth so that it powers their body.
Yeah.
And
different layers of actualization, depending on where your focus is, right?
But even the general, okay, as long as you know that the chickens might be inhumanely raised and that there's billions of them slaughtered across the world, then if you know those things and you still choose to do it, then that's your choice. But if you have never been taught about those things, then you might not even be aware of what's going on in the food supply chain that's getting the actual stuff to you. So first and foremost, it's our responsibility to go inward, manage thy own inner self, and inspire thyself to learn and to care about learning. And the boulder of ignorance that's strapped to all of our ankles is like a square kilometer when we're born, and then we have to chip away at it with a pickaxe our whole life, just little tiny bits our whole life. And then eventually, if you are 40 or 60 or 80 and you've gotten that kilometer square sized boulder down to 100 meters squared, that's pretty fucking good. And then you can disseminate a lot of that wisdom to other people in the world. And if you're there with a pickaxe, how can you upgrade your tool to be a freaking excavator that can tackle out that boulder versus maybe one pin you're trying to pin at it? It's very small, like a little microscopic shovel or something. What is your tool at excavating that boulder of ignorance as well? So I love how we've gotten down here. I really think this has been one of my favorite conversations on the show. I'm happy that we're going back and forth, and we're so free-spirited.
Well, you're super articulate. I just really appreciate the metaphors you're using and the depth you're going into, and the passion that you're talking about these ideas with. And honestly, you're asking some really great questions, and my brain is just going in so many different directions that I'm trying to integrate, and I love that place. It's a great place to be.
Thank
in
you.
curiosity.
And the tennis match can't be played without the other person on the other side. That's hitting the ball back, and that's adding their own unique thoughts to it, the new analogies and metaphors that are really helping this conversation come to life. So.
Okay, are we wrapping up
you.
now?
What
because
are we at?
because
We're at
you're talking
1
like
hour.
we're wrapping up,
We're
so
at
I want
1
to.
hour. Let's see if we can.
Because I have to ask you before we wrap
Yeah,
up. At some
okay.
point, we have to talk about what your superpower is.
That's right.
That's right. He says.
I forgot about that. Good. So, I think part of the superpower is the insatiable curiosity.
Yeah.
That's part of the superpower. I really don't. I don't take time very lightly. I take time as the most valuable commodity that exists.
Wow,
you're
interesting.
dying every second,
Yeah.
and so to leverage every second for growth is amazing.
Wow.
And so I choose to do that. So if I do have a spare moment to do something like learn, I will either, for example, here's a good. Hopefully this resonates.
Yeah.
I was just eating a falafel pita yesterday from the Flying Falafel next door. Amazing place. We got to get them as patrons. So I'm eating that, and for the first chunk of it, I was just really absorbed into the moment of the beauty of the food and of the taste of the food on my tongue. Yeah. And as I was swallowing it and digesting it, I was just absorbed into that process. I was really grateful for that whole process. Then I was like, okay, I've eaten quite a bit of the falafel. How about I open up a video that I want to watch? To me, that is one of the key turn points of your life, is valuing time and then realizing what we are using our time for. So as I open up YouTube, all of my recommended videos are pretty much global leaders disseminating knowledge. And the videos that I watched were the ex-president of Google China speaking about artificial intelligence.
You mean in this particular moment when you're eating your sandwich?
In that particular moment,
Yeah.
yeah. So I watched that for like 3 minutes, and then I think Ron and Elisa came in through the door. So I, stopped watching videos at that time. But that's a little example of, what are you watching when you flick on the YouTube or the Netflix or whatever it is. So insatiable curiosity,
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Not taking time lightly, really, really understanding moment to moment that death is coming, and not only should I be learning as much as possible, but I should also be wanting to bring as much value and impact and flourishing to the world.
Yeah, there's something in your superpower that I'm seeing that has to do with both of those things, but some kind of integration having to do with, I have like this feeling of like exploding things, like not like blowing things up in a positive way. It's almost like I feel like you're throwing at the sense I get, and this is really the first in-depth conversation we've had.
Can I make an analogy?
Yeah, please.
Could it be like there's this whole carpet is just filled with Legos, like little Lego pieces.
Yeah.
And then there's like viewers that are watching the Lego pieces, and then I just like dig up a couple Lego pieces, piece them together, and throw them up for like a vision, and like people are like, whoa, look at how those Lego pieces are arranged.
Yeah, that works, but I see it as like being a little more vibrant than that and a little more integrated.
Oh, there's some like fireworks.
Yeah, that's
going
exactly. No, it's exactly what I was going to say. Fireworks is actually the explosion that I'm imagining.
Cool.
Like I think you're an exploder. You're an exploder of ideas because there is something that I really get from you that has to do with really dynamic. There's a big piece. It's not just you're not evolving ideas. Your insatiable curiosity is creating explosive, fireworks. Something like that. It's not really the way I usually think about
That's cool.
superpowers, but
Yeah.
there's something like that that's really
Yeah.
cool. Your brain is really interesting.
Thank
how
you.
It works.
I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
My again, the tennis matches are only as good as the person sitting across from me. Seriously, it's useless to just be sitting here and going blah, 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 because of that is just, it's nowhere near as powerful in my opinion. I really like dialogue between two people.
Yeah, the thing that I love about it is there's so many things that I still feel are these open threads that I'm feeling like, okay, but what's the answer to this other piece? You know, there's so many different directions it could still go. So
without getting very constantly just wanting to like give each other hella love all the time, I recognize you recognizing me, and I really appreciate that, because it's actually quite rare.
It's one of my
today's
superpowers
world.
for sure.
Thank you.
Sure.
And
thank you for recognizing it.
And I would like to then reply in return that just the sheer way that we can converse and laugh and be together is really cool, and it requires a special person to also be able to do that with. So I feel you. And
Thank
I'm
you.
really happy that you are unpacking these firework explosions that are occurring on both the Superpower You podcast, but as well as the other explorations of your life, especially with meta learning and helping with Uncollege. And I really think that that's a powerful thing that you've brought together 400 families to be thinking about this.
You know, I think the one thing I would want to say to that, one thing, it's the interesting thing, there are many things, but that process of bringing together those families is part of a larger piece for me, which, again, when I look at what are the strengths that I have, or what is the way my life is generating and evolving and unfolding, is it really has to do with larger principles. And that is the larger principle of freedom and autonomy, collectivity and community, and there's another one, something like, I don't know, change, evolution, something like that. So the piece, like, I'm not that involved. There are lots of other people running that group now, and I'm super happy that it exists, because it's really needed for people to come together and to explore what that means to have autonomy outside. But the thing is, the primary value is what are the ways that we can come together to create community and collectivity so that we can actually live autonomous, free lives where we're expressing ourselves in the best way we possibly can. And so that operates in other ways in my life too. But the other thing I also want to say is when you just reflected me back to me and the experience of being here, I really felt it, and I think that is a meta experience of what we're talking about, right? It's like, how can we actually
conversations between people?
Yeah, like how can we actually just sit here together and explore these abstract ideas that are interesting and useful and powerful, but then when it comes right down to it, how can we just be connected and feel each other? And it's beautiful.
If you come up like this, this is the connect guys,
Okay.
and then just go like this.
Oh,
and
where
then
did I see this?
the
Oh, you're
connect-
guys, you're
Yeah,
two guys.
yeah.
That was such a beautiful video. Oh.
Isn't this amazing?
Yes.
This is human connection.
Human connection.
Yeah.
That's where we can start.
Yeah.
Even if we can't change those flat earthers.
So I wanna still ask you a couple more questions.
Yeah.
Okay. So we went through the scaffolding. I think that's a lot of what your meta learning pushes about, is the scaffolding, which is great. We talked about that a lot. We have the Superpower You link in the description for people to check out. Let's walk you through a couple of our questions. I would like to hear your thoughts. Okay.
All right.
At least give me an idea about what you think about this sort of globalization that's occurring. How does the U.S. collaborate with China, with Russia, with Africa as it develops? How do we work together?
Okay, ask me a different one.
Where'd that question come from?
That one's just
Yeah,
a little, that one's
yeah.
not, like, that's definitely not my jam. Like,
Okay.
I'm grateful for the fact that we are all needed, because and this is where it comes right down to my superpower
I
thing,
think
right?
you're answering the question right
Okay,
now.
maybe
but
I'll answer it in a meta way, right? But the thing is, when it comes down to it, we are all needed. And there are people out there who know No, maybe they don't even know what the answers are, but they're engaged in the question enough that they can influence it. And I'm not that. So try another one out.
All right. Okay, how about, what do you think is the most beautiful thing in the world?
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, we're kind of already touching on it. For me, some of the most beautiful things in the world have to do with connection and human experience that's shared and community and change and growth.
Yeah.
And, you know, like it's a little bit redundant to our conversation, but it's essentially the truth for me. And there is nothing to me more beautiful and in some ways more elusive. And especially as our world goes the direction it's going right now, in that. And I think that's one of the things that is interesting about your question. Some of the questions that I was looking at and I'm thinking about is, how do we go the direction that we're going technologically and maintain our presence and our connection with ourselves and with each other?
Yes.
And I was really fascinated by the fact when I watched some of your videos how you're engaged in both of those queries at the same time. And again, that's that dialectical for me, right? And that's the dance that's beautiful to me, is how do we take these opposing human forces, whether they're, you know, AGI and the development of, you know, the singularity and where things are going technologically, and are we going to get to the place where we can upload our brains and live forever, and that kind of scientific challenge. And then the other side of the coin, which is our very human experience that exists in nature in the moment. And how the hell do we integrate those on a day-to-day level in a practical way and have them coexist in our own lives? And I guess what I would say is that beautiful and elusive dance is a beautiful practice of being human.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's an answer, I guess.
That's a good one. Mm-hmm.
And I, you know, that query for me is just such a profound one. Like, how do we live in the future world that's coming and not lose our humanity?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. That's a good question. That needs to be added to our simulation list of questions.
Well, it's probably
like
just
that.
the next step of humanity, where we'll no longer be humans, but the next thing. That's just, I'm just gonna. So many of our conversations go towards getting rid of the flesh vehicle or the meat puppet and moving on to a digital consciousness.
What do you think about that? I'm sorry to interrupt you.
We talk about that, and you know, we don't yet know how it's going to work, but it's also very fascinating to think about it.
It's crazy to think about. It's crazy. I mean, I'm really mind blown by it, and I'm really triggered by it too. I'm super triggered by it.
It's just so funny how Silicon Valley just has this concentration of these conversations.
Yeah.
You know, and there are other places in the world that have these concentrations of conversations as well, but the network effect here is just, it's gone crazy.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this earlier, but you could probably double all of the rent prices, even though they're already so fucking high. You could probably still double the rent prices, or even, let's say 1.5 times them. And people in San Francisco would still figure out a way to earn enough money to be able to live here to pay the rent, because they care so much about the network effect.
Yeah.
The culmination of all of these ideas and all of these diverse people and all that kind of stuff is just crazy. So landlords that are listening, please, we will take a 50% royalty on that idea. Just kidding.
But you know what, just to add into that, everything swings, right? And when I see people increasingly looking at living in communities because they need to, as a direct result of where rent prices are going, I feel or I see people developing things like Camp Grounded, where they're asking people in their 30s to say, hey, let's leave our technology at home and reground ourselves in nature.
Yeah.
That's part of the
digital detox.
The digital detox thing, and that focus, as well as, like I say, people living in communities. This is something that, it's not new, but I think it's potentially going to grow and become a lot more prevalent in Silicon Valley out of necessity. And I think that's a beautiful, wonderful thing. It's this whole nuclear family thing, and I've lived in one. I've been fighting it, you know, by having other people living in my house and couch surfers and lots of Airbnb and building communities. But this whole thing about these isolated small nuclear families we live in, it is not ideal. And so in some ways, it's the negative things that, birth the new layer of positive.
Oh, you're so right. We just had Roman on the show, Yampolsky, AI safety and security professor, researcher, and author, and he specifically talks about how all of the fuck-ups that AI has are the reasons why we just go and start making it more safe and secure.
Right.
There might be a really bad uh-oh in the future, but...
I have to watch that episode, is that what you're telling me? To find out what it is?
But this is also very applicable to what we see outside of our door.
Yeah,
As in,
it is.
Alan, like 1.5 times the rent in SF, more homeless people.
Yeah.
So it's very applicable to what we see happening.
Yes.
And to figure it out is a difficult, complex process, and I'm
Yep.
very inspired to work with other leaders around the world to try and make it work. Another question for you is, what is something that you believe to be true that nobody else really believes to be true?
Nobody else?
Or very, very few people?
Well, okay, I will answer that with regard to what I live in, right? So again, we're in Silicon Valley, and I am surrounded by people who are oriented towards ending aging. And I'm grateful for it. I think it's a really worthy process. My husband is one of them. And I used to host the Quantified Self Silicon Valley group for many years. So I'm surrounded by people who are interested in biohacking and optimizing our aging, and even go so far as to say we can end, we can extend human life into forever. And I think you said you're going to have Aubrey de Grey on your show, and he's one. And so I have this challenge between recognizing this pursuit. It's a worthy pursuit in some ways, and in other ways, I think it is a disservice to us as human beings.
Tell us why.
Well, I think that there's an egocentricity to the idea that we should live together, and I know all of the Silicon Valley brains can give me all kinds of logical reasons why I'm wrong and why it doesn't make sense. But I do feel, and I've been thinking about this a lot more as I've recently lost my mom to cancer, and I see, aging as something that, and I'm not saying losing my mom to cancer was beautiful. It was not. It was extremely painful. But there's a part of the stages of life that I think our obsession with youth and with living forever gets in the way of us actually experiencing. So I think that there is sort of a tension between the natural wisdom that we can develop if we go through the stages of our lives in the most natural way, and we end up with the wisdom of each stage, because each stage has this incredible beauty, right? And some of the later ones, the possibility in later stages of aging come from the inclination to create this space for the next generation of people. And if our focus is all on how do we live forever, then I feel that in some ways we're missing that vital and beautiful possibility of putting our attention on the next generation. And so I don't want to go so far as to say that I believe completely differently. Again, I'm back to how do we resolve these seemingly opposing ideas, right? How do we pursue extending human life and live an exquisite life in the face of our own death? And how do we embrace death and aging as part of our inevitable process? And how can they all live together? I just sometimes feel that our youth-centered focus on, our culture's focus on youth and retaining youth actually costs us some of the wisdom that we might otherwise land in. I was thinking about the fact that if you were to, if I was to ask you, here, let me ask you the question actually. If you could live to be 110, if you could, having to fight your way through it, versus dying at 80, peaceful and happy about it, and happy with your life, which would you choose? I mean, obviously the ideal, I guess, is, I'll let you, I haven't let you answer, but obviously you can live to be 110 and peacefully die when you're 110. That's the ideal, right? It wasn't a very well articulated question. I'm gonna
I
take
hear
it back.
I hear what you're saying.
You feel what
It
I'm
was-
trying to get at? Like,
yeah.
it's like,
A life of more suffering, but 30 more years, or less suffering.
I mean, the suffering is not something that the people who are after extending life are. They're very clear that what they're after is extending health
You
span.
mentioned the stages of
Yeah,
life, and
yeah.
I really enjoyed that because there is this uniqueness to being a child and just
Yeah.
being this like absorption of all of the environment, and then there's this uniqueness of being 18 and being like, what do I do with my life?
Yep.
And then there's this uniqueness of being like 26 and just like hustling, and then there's this uniqueness of being like 35 and wanting to have kids or having
Yep.
kids, and then there's this uniqueness of being like 45. Yeah. and-
Then when you start, I think 40, around that stage is when you start to look at what is it going to mean for you to start to see in your aging years, and then you start to think. I mean, I think it starts to change a little bit as our lifespan extends, right?
Totally.
And so I think that happens
and
more
then it
in
gets
50.
shifted out. So that's the argument on the
But
aging
the guy
side
who did
of
that,
things.
the guy who, I don't know if you're referring to the same one I am, but there's the guy who did these stages, and they're almost math on to what you talked about, so it may be the same one. He ended at 60. So
Well, let's map. Yeah, let's
You
map.
know?
If we just double from 80 to 160,
Yeah.
you just double
Maybe.
the span, potentially double the span of
Yeah.
things and of each phase of life. But also, the only way to get to 160 is by living healthier with less disease. I already have disease accumulating in my 25-year-old body, and that is very frustrating for me to think about
Yeah.
because I don't even want the 13-year-old to be accumulating disease in their body.
Yeah.
So what's the best way to do that is to make tweaks along the way over time. At the
Yeah.
first sign of the pathology, go in there and tweak.
For sure.
But if we do that, then maybe somebody that is 50 actually doesn't have any signs of aging yet, which is crazy to think about because then they can go and do what they want. I think I
But
agree.
I think they're two different pieces. I think that's a great thing. If we can get rid of disease and just come like, my hip's killing me right now because my arthritis, blah blah blah. So that would be great. But there's another part of it that has to do with the psychological experience of aging and aging well psychologically. And I think that when we put too much focus on our bodies and on curing the disease in our bodies, and there's good reason to do that, but sometimes I think it gets in the way of our psychological aging in a healthy way. And in particular, the thing that I'm trying to say that I'm not saying very well is that one of the stages that happens, whether it's 50 or 60, I don't know, sometime around there, is your focus goes a lot more extensively towards other people. Now, I would say that you're pretty precocious in your attention on the external world and on other people. If you're only 25, I thought you were actually a lot older than that based on your thinking. But I think for most people going through these general stages of life, that gets a lot deeper. Partly, I think, when you start as a result of starting to see your death approaching.
Yeah.
And I don't think everybody has this experience you do of the preciousness of time and living fully in every moment when they're 25. I think for a lot of people it takes having a bit of a closer brush with death.
Yeah, yeah.
So you might be unusual in that way.
I've had a couple, which has helped me a lot. Yeah.
Maybe it's that. but-
So I'm glad that, seriously, this last bit has been equally as epic as the first. We have to do number 2. We do. We have to make number 2 happen at some point.
Sounds good. Maybe
Conversation
I'll figure out
two.
some of the answers to some of those big hard questions you asked me.
If you come in and ask me, another question about like what makes a quality question, that was fantastic. We unpack that for 10, 15 minutes, just that question. So
I definitely feel there's a lot more we could talk about for sure.
yeah, so
Yeah.
let's both come in hot with some more questions, and we'll.
And then maybe you can come on my show too.
Yeah,
That'd be
exactly. Can we not take this and
Yeah,
make it?
maybe this'll be
maybe this can be an episode
Yeah,
on the podcast.
I think
that
so.
that would be nice. We would love that, and we would share the crap out of it across all our platforms. So, okay, so this was incredible. I'm super grateful.
Thank you. Me too. Really,
Thank
really
you.
beautiful and lovely to connect with you.
You too.
And your brain. And now your hands.
And yeah, your hands, your heart, your brain, the 3D reality that we live in. We want to, we should both give a shout out to Keith Powers, our friend.
Yeah,
for
totally.
connecting us. Just a really And patrons. He's a patron of our project, and Clea Irwin is as well, their family office. It's just,
Yep.
it's amazing when the really strong connections are made between people when they
Yep.
feel that it would be good. So thank you so much. And thank you everyone for tuning in. If you had a good time, give us a like, comment below what you think. We'd love to hear from you. Or email in simulationseries@gmail.com. Give us a subscribe. Share the content. Give the content a share. We have so many topics covered in this talk. If segments were profound to you, go to that time stop and copy the URL at that time and send it off to people. Get them thinking about it and talking about it more. Let's get more of these interesting conversations going on across the world. Support us on Patreon if you'd like. We'd greatly appreciate it. We have a roof and electricity and internet and all these other things that we need to cover, so we would love your help and support with that, all our equipment. Big shout out to our partner producer, Ron Vargas, who's always doing an incredible job back there. Thank you so much. And please check out the Superpower You podcast with Lisa Betts-Lacroix. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Such a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Bye, guys.